take the opportunity on behalf of the United National Congress led by the Honorable Kamala Prasad Bisesa and also leader of the opposition and our great party, the United National Congress, to welcome you to another of our Sunday morning press briefing where the United National Congress will seek to analyze the issues affecting the people of Trinidad and Tobago as a result of the failed leadership of Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley and his incompetent government. This morning, I am joined by my colleague, former Senator Tahaka Obika, who is also the chief economist at the office of the leader of the opposition, as we will seek to break down some of the critical issues, as I said, which is impacting upon the well-being of the people of Trinidad and Tobago from the point of view of our standard of living and quality of life. Tomorrow, we as a nation will celebrate Emancipation Day, which will signify the end of slavery. And tomorrow, as a nation, we must display a strong sense of responsibility to remember the millions of our African brothers and sisters who were forced from their homes and sold into slavery. And as a result of being sold into slavery, they were stripped of everything by their colonial masters in terms of their rituals, customs, names, and language. And while we will remember the transatlantic trade and that horrendous journey, it is nothing to celebrate, but we must remember the contributions of all resistance leaders and all those who fell during the struggle to emancipate and set all free and get rid of that horrendous Middle Passage journey and slavery. And today we recognize the contribution of our African brothers and sisters in the journey to build a better Trinidad and Tobago. And in this regard also, the United National Congress takes the opportunity to congratulate Nicholas Paul on winning our first gold medal in 56 years in the current cycling event at the ongoing Commonwealth Games in Birmingham, England. We wish to congratulate him, and we look forward to more success from all athletes of our Trinidad and Tobago's contingent who are participating in these games, as we take our joy in celebrating his historic win and achievement. Without further ado, I will now invite Mr. Tahaka Obika to address you under the broad theme of Raulinomics is sinking Trinidad and Tobago.
Thank you, MP Darsing. And it's apparent that the government has luckily happened upon the $8.1 billion. So for this fiscal year, every month on average, they've earned almost $1 billion extra. Who is this money filtering to? We must first recognize that this is a byproduct of human suffering in Eastern Europe. And of course, we recognize that it is not as a result of government policy that has created any boom in our economy, but really it's something that we are not in control of. We are price takers in the international energy space, whether it be in petrochemicals, the urea, ammonium, methanol, or the oil and gas. Now, $8.1 billion. Keith Rowley as Prime Minister, Dr. Keith Rowley as Prime Minister. Yet, 100,000 plus jobs have been lost. How is this money going to be applied to relieve the suffering of citizens in this country? from a very basic level, we in the opposition are very clear that there are citizens across the length and breadth of this country for whom a daily meal is a struggle. The current Prime Minister, when he was opposition leader, made a statement that $100 for many, paraphrase, is a stretch. But of course, now that he is in the seat, under his government, when the billions was rolling in January, they cancelled the very program that was reaching those most in need, that is the food basket program. So they are not listening to the cries of the people, and despite having the most money at his disposal than he has ever had in the 7 years in office, at the very point in time when they started getting the most funding, they decided to close the tap to the citizens that were most in need. Now, on one hand, you offer public servants 1%, all right? But the same public servants, what the Prime Minister and the Minister of Finance will not tell the population. The same public servants, when they went into discussions with the government, were asking for their basic needs to be met. If their basic needs could have been met, they may have been a little more understanding. But the government is not giving any space in terms of gate program access. In fact, to the contrary, the Minister of Finance is reported, hopefully those reports are false, but is reported to have been telling the University of the West Indies to close down some of their programs, which basically means to continue to restrict access to tertiary education at a time when they have the most access to funding. So they've cut the GATE program. There is no announcement of strengthening the CDAP program. You have elderly persons who are struggling on a monthly basis to find medicine, to find access, to find money to pay for medicine. There is no increased access to education. The ECC centers that were built under the Kamala Kosam government are still laid to waste, whether in Point Fortin constituency, a PNM head constituency, all right, in Bonas and Cedras, or whether it be in Valencia or other parts of the country. Then, of course, you have primary schools that are not being completed. So access to education from the cradle to tertiary education is abandoned. And even the elderly who want to transition themselves, to retool themselves because they've lost their jobs, persons are above 50 years old, they still have mortgages to pay, they still have children to support, they still have dependents, they still have expectations of themselves and their own career. They are still cut out of the GATE program. So there is no access to education from the cradle to post-retirement. And then, of course, the state of the roads. Housing. There is no housing program. And then the same citizens have to face higher fuel prices. So there is the government is giving the citizens no reprieve, no release from pressure, but at the same time telling them to hold tight. Hold tight to what? Who is benefiting? Now, while you recognize the funding that has been available via commercial banks and the credit unions to some businesses that could qualify, that could manage to qualify for the up to $1 million for working capital support, we have always been saying that the system that is in place is not all encompassing, and there are many businesses that are not finding themselves able to come up to the threshold that is required. But these are viable businesses that have persons that depend on them. What we are saying is that the government needs to pivot to focusing on expanding the economy. There is need for capital expenditure for companies to grow. If a company wants to put in an additional warehouse, $1 million won't help them. The government needs to focus on giving the business sector what is required. Now, when we look at the newspaper today, I'll deal with that now, but I want to just echo the sentiment of the business community. Because after the Minister of Finance made a statement after the Prime Minister made a statement about an early budget, the business community, no less than the TT Chamber and the Samoa Business Chamber, I think it was Mr. Roach, lamented that the government has not been paying VAT returns, so he announced $8 billion on one end. But the business chamber on the next end is saying you're not paying them the money that is due to them. Well, this has to be criminal. And on top of that, you have the Sound Business Chamber stating that employees are not getting their income tax returns. So you're stifling, or not paying VAT returns on its own. It's bad for business as it stifles liquidity and restricts economic activity in terms of how fast they can recover capital and turn over business. This affects gross domestic product, it affects output, it affects the size of the economy. But by withholding income tax returns also, the government is also curtailing expenditure from the household level. This is much needed expenditure, much needed to keep jobs on. The government is contributing to a snowballing effect where they are sucking up money and withholding it from taxpayers. So the central bank just this month, because we are still in July, reported that 29% of persons in the National Financial Literacy Report surveyed, 29% of the persons revealed that they did not have enough money to make it to the month end. 3 in 10 people. That's almost 1 in every 3 persons. Alright? Whilst the Minister of Finance speaks of 5% inflation, the disposable income of citizens who don't have enough money to make it to the month end, they are still facing over 100% increase in the price of fuel under this government, 50% and more increases in the price of food over the past 2 years, cuts to access to gate, restrictions to access to public housing. They are facing the onslaught of what is now known as Raulinomics. It is the bad version of Abenomics, right? Of late memory. So, unfortunately, we have nothing positive to report on the Prime Minister's announcement of another budget. They are happy to have $8.1 billion, but not much of that has found its way into the bank accounts of citizens. So now let me just go to the emancipation topic. So emancipation, never again slavery. Internationally, emancipation signals that the struggles of the African to be free, the struggles of all the ancestors that fought for liberation, was done so that throughout humanity, not a single human being, it will not be acceptable for a single human being to be enslaved. In whatever condition, whatever form of slavery there exists, it is not acceptable. And that is the struggle that the African endured for all of humanity. And at this point in time, it is always necessary on Emancipation Day, which will be observed tomorrow and throughout the former British Empire. Alright? Recall the names of those that fought for freedom. Toussaint Louverture, Jean-Jacques Dessalines, they were in the French Empire, but they liberated Haiti. And despite the talk of emancipation being a conscious decision, it was because the African was fighting for liberation. And it was a victory fought on the blood of the ancestors. So, at this point in time, we also like to contribute, like to mention and call the names of those ancestors who continue that enlightenment. Because as Bob Marley said, the physical shackles have been gone, but mental emancipation is necessary. So, we also call on T.B. Rabas Butler, George Padmore, C.L.R. James, Jennifer Jones, Beverly Jones, my apologies, Beverly Jones, who died in the cane fields in Trinidad and Tobago, and of course, Makanda Daga. Now, there's a very important topic I want to spend 5 minutes on. Let the record show that Keith Rowley never cared about reparations. Dr. Keith Rowley never cared about reparations. There's an African saying, before you accept the gift of cloth of someone, first look at what they are wearing. In other words, look at their actions. The Prime Minister would like the nation to believe that he cares about reparations. This was evident in the Shelter Baptist observances, where he made that statement, which one could have probably felt it was in response to what was happening with the Duke of Cambridge visiting Jamaica. All right? At the time. I will not brief the Duke of Cambridge. Of course, neither Keith Rowley. So, but we are dealing with the issues of reparations. And the statement of the Prime Minister prompted the former head of the Reparations Committee, Raulinomics, to publish an open letter to the Prime Minister. Alright? And the fact is that the Reparations Committee in Trinidad and Tobago was formed in 2014. Now we have to remember that we are in the decade of persons of African descent. And under the People's Partnership Government, led by Kamala Persad-Bissessar, that had 5 political parties that were part of it. NJAC was one. The Reparations Committee was important to that agenda of that government. And Raulinomics reminded the Prime Minister that the Commission was established to deal with the very thing he was masquerading to be the advocate for when he says, and I quote, the Prime Minister conveniently ignores the fact that the TTNCR, National Committee on Reparations, as part of the CARICOM Reparations Commission, is not solely concerned about money, but has a 10-point plan that incorporates the situation of the First Peoples, as well as a full formal apology, illiteracy eradication, public health crisis, African knowledge program, psychological rehabilitation, technology transfer, and debt cancellation, unquote. It is clear that reparations will benefit all in our society. This is evidenced by the University of Glasgow and the University of the West Indies Agreement for slavery reparations to the tune of 20 million British pounds in July 2019 as part of the efforts of UB Vice Chancellor Professor Hilary Beckles, the same professor that this government under Keith Rowley tried to remove. Right? Of course, if that wasn't bad enough, let's look at the persons who on the committee. We have Raulinomics, Kafra Cambon, Teresa Nesbitt Skinner, Lucia Philip, Chief Ricardo Barrett Hernandez, the one Pianki from the Council of Orisha Elders, Clyde Noel from World Mansions of Rastafari, Seadun Caribbean Exemplar, we all know who he is. And of course, Ambassador Moten Hassan. Now, this was a CARICOM mandate, the 34th regular meeting of CARICOM, heads of government, held here in Port of Spain in 2013, in July. All CARICOM member states agreed to the establishment of these national reparations committees. This was not a people's partnership. This is an African, Pan-African, and a First People's agenda that was adopted by CARICOM as policy that Keith Rowley has gone against, and only decided to resurrect its memory when faced with a challenge from the Duke of Cambridge going to Jamaica as opposed to Trinidad and Tobago, which is relevant to the whole context of this thing. But he was just looking for a media soundbite, because clearly his actions don't follow, because his action shows that he cares not for reparations. In fact, when the question was raised in Parliament on the 10th of December 2020, after 5 years and 3 months in office, the government was asked by Senator Paul Richards, independent senator, about the delay in implementation of the National Committee on Reparations. And this would have been a question notice. The response was offered and was answered by the Minister of National Security, who of course was in the office of the Prime Minister. And I quote, this Minister Churchill, I quote, Madam President, the National Committee on Reparations was established in February 2014 by the then UNC government and launched officially in June 2015. Over a year later, the chairman of that committee was also the chairman of NJAC at that time. Regarding the future functioning of the National Committee on Reparations, this has been subject of several discussions. However, Minister Young concluded his initial response by throwing cold water on the idea of immediate restoration of the committee, when he said, I quote, the matter is being reviewed by the government and will be subject to cabinet consideration in the near future. Unquote. When asked how soon will this be done, the response was, I quote, the minister with the responsibility is working on it expeditiously, assiduously, and we expect to come back to the public very shortly, unquote. Nothing has been done since then. That was December 2020. We are in July 2022. There has been no reparations committee restored, and this government simply does not care about the enlightenment of the African, and we only have to look at the emancipation villages here and the lack of funding that has been received by the Emancipation Support Committee. Alright? I hold no brief for the Emancipation Support Committee. Of course, I hold no brief, so I'm not going to tell you. But it must be clear that the Pan-African observances in the Queen's Park Savannah has been the worst funded under the Keith Rowley government than under any government since they have been funded by the government of Trinidad and Tobago. Alright? And let the record show that the Keith Rowley government is one that focuses on lip service. And as the Express headlines demonstrate, on the eve of emancipation, these are the words of Langston Roche, a stalwart in the African business community in Trinidad and Tobago, stating more black businesses needed. Limited assets are a problem, challenges in accessing finance, insufficient community support. But how can we get support when this government is focused on supporting those in the inner circle of the Rowley PNM, where even his ministers are not even on the inside, because they don't get the recusals that are available to a few. I want to end on that note, because emancipation wasn't fought by kind words. It was fought by facing the truth, and facing the truth squarely, regardless of who it may offend. Because the truth, as we say in African tradition, is like a lion. It needs no help. It needs no defender. And to all my African brothers and sisters, and to everyone in Trinidad and Tobago, of whatever ethnicity you may belong, the lesson on Emancipation Day that you can teach to your children and to yourself is that never again slavery, and that freedom is a birthright that every human being deserves to celebrate. And I encourage all in South, Marbella, we'll be having a wonderful celebration. After you visit the Emancipation Village and the parade on Monday morning tomorrow, and be celebrating our splendor, come down to South at 3:30 p.m. in Southern Marines Pan Palais for an Emancipation celebration, intimate celebration with our brothers and sisters in South. MP, I turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Brother Tahaka Wika. Food for thought in terms of the level of support which has been given to the Emancipation Support Committee, and also Never Against Slavery, as tomorrow we will reflect on the importance of Emancipation Day as it relates to Trinidad and Tobago, and he has issued an open invitation to join him and others as Emancipation Day will be celebrated in Marbella at Southern Marines Palais Panyard at 3:30 p.m. And this morning our theme is Raulinomics is killing TNT. It is sinking TNT into a state of abyss on the brink of collapse. And Trinidad and Tobago, you would have heard of Reaganomics, a term that was used to describe the economic thrust of President Ronald Reagan during his term of office. And it was based on neoliberal economic policies promoted in the 1980s and based on the concept of reduction in taxes, reduction in regulation, reduction in government spending, and reduction of money supply as in relation to inflation. You would have heard of Trumponomics, a term used to describe economic structure during the term of President Donald Trump. And you would have heard of Abenomics, used to describe the economic ideology of the late Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. Abenomics involved increasing the country's money supply, increasing overall government expenditure, and implementing economic reforms to boost and protect the Japanese economy. Today, the United National Congress, we wish to introduce a new economic concept to the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And that economic concept is called Raulinomics. Over the past 7 years in Trinidad and Tobago, we have seen the emergence of Raulinomics, while this is in no way an attempt this morning by the UNC to academically legitimize the policies of Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley and his government. It is a phrase that we have realized have resulted in a state of collapse in every sphere of activities in Trinidad and Tobago, because we believe it is based on hyper-capitalist policies in support of an economic oligarchy focusing on the gerrymandering of state policies to almost exclusively favor the interests of the economic oligarchs, and Raulinomics favors an increase in taxation to limit liquidity and spending, therefore eliminating small to medium-sized enterprises so that conglomerates could continue to prosper without competition. Raulinomics, we believe, is based on the 5 pillars of: 1, a reduction in the spending power of the middle and lower classes, achieved through the engineering of rising cost of living, low employment and commercial activity, the frustration of state services and goods to validate the private takeover or privatization of these goods and services, the tampering of government policy and processes to create a monopoly by select conglomerates within the economy of this country, the distribution of state goods and services and state-based commercial activity based on patronage to the political elite, and the delegitimization of the labor and working class, which they see as inconsequential to the economic policy of this country. We have seen, as I said, Raulinomics take over Trinidad and Tobago, and according to Raulinomics, we must forget the poor people of this country and give the rich more chances to make money and hope that the wealth trickles down to the poor. Under Raulinomics, we must create a job for Kamal Georges and the political favorites of the Prime Minister, send home hundreds of thousands of workers in an attempt to, as I said, prosper the political elites and friends and financiers of Rowley and his colleagues. Under Raulinomics, HD tenants who pay maintenance fees, as the headlines in today's Express will show, that tenants want to know where the money has gone, why residents who live in the newer HDC developments such as Viewfort in St. James, Rail Spring in Valsine, Oasis Greens in Chaguanas, and Ridgeview Heights in Bonaire, who pay high maintenance fees, they want to know where their money has gone, because under Raulinomics, people must pay higher prices on rents and mortgages and then come to be subjected to the implementation of the property tax by the end of December of 2022. And under Raulinomics, businesses across Trinidad and Tobago are closing. They are struggling to make ends meet. But one, Minister Stuart Young, has had to recuse himself no less than 98 times from the cabinet room of Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley. And then the former Attorney General, Faris Al-Rawi, has had to recuse himself for more than 40 times because they held interest in terms of their business relationships that came before the cabinet of Trinidad and Tobago in terms of companies or proposals. And today, the UNC will continue to echo that call to the Prime Minister to provide a list of matters from which Ministers Stuart Young, Faris Al-Rawi, and Rohan Sinanan have had to recuse themselves so that the country can see what business they had with matters before the cabinet and how much money they and their friends or their families or financiers stood to make. Because you see, distinguished citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, we are being told that they were acting in the interest of good governance of Trinidad and Tobago, transparency and accountability, and they were doing the proper and ethical thing. But what they were actually doing is sanitizing their sins in terms of their recusals. And they will want you to believe that the monetary transactions that they recused themselves from really did not impact upon Trinidad and Tobago, because they will tell you that it was in and around 3%. But 3% of $15 billion is quite a substantial amount of money. And that is why nothing is working for you, the ordinary people in Trinidad and Tobago. Whether it is roads, it is bridges, it is CDAP drugs, it is surgeries within the public healthcare system, the primary schools are in a dilapidated state, the economy of Trinidad and Tobago is on the verge of collapse. And in addition to that, we have not been told by the Minister of Finance when there is projected economic growth in Trinidad and Tobago. And in fact, we, in terms of the UNC, we were of the opinion that these recusals would have been in the format of the ministers leaving or exiting the cabinet room when matters that were of a conflict of interest nature came before the cabinet for discussion. But I want to remind Trinidad and Tobago, earlier on this week or last week, on a program that was aired on I-95.5, the Minister of Energy and Energy Affairs, and also Minister in the Office of the Prime Minister, who touts himself to be the Deputy Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, was so brazen, so bold-faced, and so arrogant to tell you that they did not even leave the cabinet room. So who in their right mind within the cabinet, especially those who do not enjoy the air of the Prime Minister inner circle, would speak out against Stuart Young or the interest of those who are related to him, who will speak out against the interest of the Attorney General, the then Attorney General Faris Al-Rawi and Rohan Sinanan. And that is why I will tell you here this morning that it was a process of sanitizing their sins. And this is why you have to understand Trinidad and Tobago against this background. This is why this cabinet gutted the procurement legislation to eliminate issues such as legal fees and medical services and so on. Did not want to have nothing to do with proper procurement standards in terms of international standards, and that is why they gutted the procurement legislation. And against this background this morning, Trinidad and Tobago must be told by the Prime Minister, why is there this delay in terms of implementing and operationalizing the procurement legislation. We are being told by this current Attorney General, Reginald Amo, that the law cannot be implemented because the procuring agencies are unprepared. I want to tell the Attorney General that he must find out from his Prime Minister why is there this delay and the lack of urgency and the political will to implement, because this was high on the priority of the Prime Minister. And we must ask the Prime Minister, Minister Stuart Young, Faris Al-Rawi and Rohan Sinanan, why the implementation of the law is being delayed by unprepared state agencies. These are line ministers. These are line ministers who have hundreds of state agencies under their ministerial responsibility, and their projects to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars, and you have to connect the dots in terms of those who recuse themselves from the cabinet room in relation to their business dealing and handling. And this is the outcome of Raulinomics in terms of the operation of his cabinet and his cabinet ministers, my brothers and sisters of Trinidad and Tobago. And this is why we call upon, again, we have to reiterate to the Prime Minister and his cabinet of recusal ministers to tell the country why the government has failed the people of Trinidad and Tobago in terms of the operationalization of this piece of legislation. And under Raulinomics, we could have enjoyed, as I said, and will continue to tell you, Baigan Chuka, and under Raulinomics, Baigan Choking Week. Under Raulinomics, the poor and middle class applicants can apply for HGC housing with no success. But the cabinet minister and member of the parliament could access HGC lands for his private use and that of his business interests in a very clandestine and covert manner. Under Raulinomics, we can send parents on the breadline, make them scrunt and suffer to mind their families, work parents to the bone with 3 and 4 members of families. And under Raulinomics, we have seen the creation of a national tripartite advisory council which has collapsed on 2 occasions under the same government that has formed it. And under Raulinomics, as I said in my opening remarks, we see the undermining and delegitimization of recognized majority union and workers association, and which are selective and non-transparent in the whole dialogue process. And that brings me to the very important issue of where we are in terms of the finances of Trinidad and Tobago. Because under Raulinomics, we are told that there's no money to fix the roads. The Minister of Works and Transport, who has recused himself from the cabinet room, have told the country, when there are more potholes than roads in this country, he has told the country he has no money. But I want to remind Trinidad and Tobago here this morning in terms of the allocations that were given to the Ministry of Works and Transport. For 2016, the Ministry of Works and Transport got $1.915 billion. In 2017, $2 $2.087 billion. In 2018, $3.09 billion. In 2019, $3.546 billion. In 2022, $2.956 billion. In 2021, $2.956 billion. In 2022, $3.577 billion, a total of $20.128 billion under Rohan Sinanan. And I also want to remind Rohan Sinanan, where did the $375 million go in terms of the $200 million from CAF, which was signed with the government of Trinidad and Tobago, a loan agreement that was to focus on enhancing the national road network through maintenance management, planning, improvement of infrastructure, and a $175 million loan to modernize the transportation infrastructure in Trinidad and Tobago. One was realized on the 14th of August 2019 and the other on the 27th of July 2021. Where did this money go, Rohan Sinanan? And that is why we will continue to ask you, and we will continue to call out the cabinet recusal ministers, because from where we sit in the UNC, this is a political hustle inside the cabinet room of Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley, and it has nothing to do with servicing the ordinary needs of the people of this country who voted for the government of Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley. And this leads me further to the very important issue of Raulinomics and WASA. My brothers and sisters, the concept of Raulinomics has destroyed this country like a raging bull. It brings us to the recent explosive announcement that there will be changes at WASA. And recently, the minister with his chairman of the Board of Commissioners, Ravindranath Nanga, they hosted a press conference and they said that the government intends to send home or fire 213 supervisors at WASA. But today, their lies, their deceit, their propaganda, their misinformation continues, because they told you 213 managers when they hosted that press conference late last week. This week, the headline is Gonzalez, WASA, to ask all 426 managers or supervisors or whatever they want to tell you. And that, for us in the United National Congress, we want to know how will the firing of these supervisors impact on the work authority. We were told that it was, well, headlines have been coming out that it will cost $600 million to fire 213. Now we have been told 426 managers will go home. And what will be the cost to the taxpayers of Trinidad and Tobago? And the UNC will further ask, how will this reduction in the WASA wage bill, which they are touting, impact upon or be reflected in the bills for the ordinary customers of Trinidad and Tobago? And this morning, I want to warn, because my colleague Barry Padarat, who has the shadow line responsibility for WASA, warned WASA workers. Because you see, this gentleman who is now the head of the Board of Commissioners of WASA, held a press conference, and then he went on to issue a chairman's bulletin by the name of Ravindranath Nanga. And I want to read from the chairman's bulletin, and I quote, "Before the new organizational structure is implemented at the level of the bargaining units, again, a negotiating team will be put in place in order to engage the recognized majority unions. We wish at this stage to assure the unions that the new approved structure will not be implemented until there has been consultation, and should the unions have any recommendations in relation to the new structure, they will be considered, and if, I want to reiterate, if agreed to by the authority, cabinet will be approached in order to vary the approved structure." They did not say anything about agree. They said will be considered and if agreed to by the authority. But you see, this Ravindranath Nanga is now the new economic hitman or the hatchet man of the Prime Minister, Dr. Rowley, and his Minister of Public Utilities. He's now the new poodle for Dr. Rowley and his cabinet, because I will demonstrate that this morning to you. Because when he said that this was a restructuring exercise and not a retrenchment exercise, and he could not say how many workers will be affected, I want to tell you, Ravindranath Nanga, you could run, but you cannot hide in terms of the reality. And to boast that you practice at the industrial court and so on, we take no comfort in what your utterances have indicated. And when you have said workers in the bargaining unit have absolutely nothing to fear, because the track record of the government as it relates to TSTT, the Trinidad and Tobago Hospitality Institute, the Tourism Development Company, Petrotrin, Caroni Green, Seafood Industry Limited, the University of Trinidad and Tobago, I want to ask you here this morning if the workers in the bargaining units there did not have absolutely nothing to fear. And I want to demonstrate that in terms of your whole posturing, and I want to read from a statement of defense of the Attorney General in support of the Attorney General Reginald Amo at the Law Association of Trinidad and Tobago special general meeting that took place on the 15th of July 2022 at the Hyatt Regency Hotel. And I want to quote from one of the transcripts that was put on the record by an attorney at law in support of Reginald Amo. And I quote from where I said the Honorable Attorney General is one of the best attorneys we have in this country. I think very few people, if they are honest with themselves, would dispute that statement, and do not think at this point in our history we could look towards anything else who can do a better job than the Attorney General. What has occurred, it is unfortunate. Yes, it is. But is it serious enough to warrant a motion of no confidence? I certainly have not lost any confidence, and I see a number of young attorneys. I so happen to also tutor at the law school, and for those who I have tutored, they would have come out at a point in time when you did not have chamber court and you would have been robbed. And that is one of the downsides of the new rules. They are not so new anymore. you have been robbed of the opportunity to observe the Honorable Attorney General, and I do not think that his conduct in this matter is sufficiently serious to warrant this motion. Certainly. So this morning I want to ask Mr. Nango or any of his commissioners at WASA if they are indeed familiar with who uttered these words at the special meeting of the Law Association in support of the Attorney General, and after having received approximately $5 million in state briefs from the regional health authorities in relation to being the former campaign manager of the Minister of Health in the constituency of St. Joseph, whether you will be prepared to act in a very independent manner and listen to the submissions of the recognized majority unions at WASA in defense of a fair and just and equitable transformation. What you all have already signaled is a process of mass dismissal, and where everybody, the numbers have changed from now 213 to 426 managers. So all the managers are going, and the playbook seems to be a repetition at what transpired at Petrotrin. And this morning I want to embellish that by warning and signaling to the National Union of Government and Federated Workers and the Public Services Association and the rank and file of all WASA workers at in terms of the respective bargaining units. What they want you to believe, those of you in the daily paid, is to send you into a state of lull, a state of complacency, and try and play with your minds and try to create a narrative that we are dealing with the managers alone. Your job will be safe. You will be able to reapply into this transformation process and so on. And I want to read from application number 7 of 218 of the in the matter of the Industrial Relations Act, Chapter 8801, based on an application by the Oilfield Workers Trade Union for an interim order under the provisions of the Industrial Relations Act, Chapter 8801, and in particular under Section 7.1 and or 10.1b thereof, and or in the inherent jurisdiction of the court between the Oilfield Workers Trade Union and the Petroleum Company of Trinidad and Tobago, which was heard by a full quorum of judges, inclusive of the President of the Industrial Court, Deborah Thomas Felix, His Honor Albert Aberdeen, His Honor Mr. K. Curl Jack, Her Honor Mr. J. Christopher Nichols, and His Honor Mr. A. Mohammed. And when you go into this particular document, which is an official document of the Industrial Court, I want to read. As a result of the meetings, the parties signed a memorandum of understanding on the 3rd of April 2028. The memorandum of agreement provided inter alia for the parties to meet and resolve the organizational structures. I want WASA workers and I want the leaders of the respective trade unions to listen to what transpired at Petrotrin, what transpired at a matter before the Industrial Court. That is why I am telling you here this morning, you cannot trust Rowley, you cannot trust Gonzalez, and you cannot trust the beneficiary of state briefs, Mr. Ravindranath Nanga. The memorandum of understanding provided inter alia for parties to meet and resolve the organizational structure, work processes, and skill competencies and manpower requirement to ensure the survival, sustainability and profitability of the company. The said memorandum of agreement provided for, and it went on to read, to progress the implementation of the organizational structure, skill, competency, work process, work customs and practice, and the manpower requirements in all areas of the company's operation, which will ensure the company's survival, sustainability, and profitability. B, to review, monitor, and ensure the progress of the working committees described in Article 2 of this Memorandum of Agreement, and to resolve any issues, C, which may arise from time to time within the working groups. The company and the union to agree to establish the establishment of a working committee comprising representatives of the OWTU and Petrotrin that will work out over the next 18 months to address and resolve and agree on the 4 issues that were agreed to. And according to this memorandum, there was to be the union submitting the names of 2 representatives to the working committee. According to the evidence before the court, the union submitted the names of the representatives to join the working committee. The working committee was never established by the board of Petrotrin on the instructions of the cabinet led by Dr. Rowley, and the tune changed from a working committee to restructured Petrotrin to the famous words of the then chairman Wilfred Espinay, all will go at Petrotrin. And that is the playbook that is unfolding under Rowley, Gonzalez, and Ravindranath Nanga at WASA. So I will tell you here this morning, my dear brothers and sisters at WASA, do not fall for the propaganda, the mamagai, the deceit, and the lies. The writing is on the wall, because this government has undermined the rule of law, good industrial relations practices in every aspect of meeting and treating with recognized majority unions in this country. And that is why I am saying to you here this morning, it has nothing to do with restructuring, it has nothing to do with transformation, it has to do with Raulinomics, which is hell-bent on sending home all the workers at WASA, privatizing WASA to benefit one of their friends and financiers, because a cabinet minister who I am told is a very honest individual, told the Minister of Public Utilities, don't waste your time with those unions, don't waste your time with the workers of WASA about transformation and restructuring. Close down the damn authority and let us all make some money. That is the cabinet of recusal, ministers of recusal. That is the hustling that is going on within the cabinet room of Dr. Rowley. And that is the Raulinomics that the United National Congress is speaking about. And that leads me to the very critical issue also of, it relates to the chaos that played out itself at the airport and immigration officers. Allowances and overtime payment is part of a collective agreement. If the line minister, Minister Hines, was doing his work, he would have ensured that allowances and overtime payment is paid in a very timely manner based on his ministerial submission to the Minister of Finance to honor something that is embedded in a collective agreement. So once again, Minister Hines, you have collapsed on the job as it relates to dealing with issues affecting the ordinary citizen of Trinidad and Tobago. You have failed the citizens on crime, you have failed law enforcement officers, and now you have failed immigration officers. So today, from the point of view of emancipation, this country must be prepared to emancipate itself from one thing only, that is the government of Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley and his Raulinomics. Because if we do not do this, he will continue to serve the interests of the economic oligarchs. He will continue to abandon the struggles of the grassroots. The government of Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley has whipped this country back into poverty and economic backwardness on behalf of the 1%, whose interest his government serves. He has replaced equality with classism, access with avoidance, humility with hubris, and care with conceit. This Emancipation Day, we must recognize that although he may be one of us, his actions and words prove that his true loyalties do not benefit the people of Trinidad and Tobago. His government has decimated the economic strength of the middle and lower class and has consolidated the economic stranglehold of the 1%. Dr. Rowley has betrayed the dream of the poor Trinbagonian to secure the economic interests of the elite, while his own PNM base and his own PNM constituency protest against him and his government, who continue to ignore their own and brand their own as opposition supporters rather than listening to the cries for better lives. Every protest now, including those organized by PNM supporters and in PNM areas, are being ignored by the government of Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley. He has created a new ruling class and has made us all subjects and commodities. And as Trinbagonians, Indians and Africans have long joined each other in their struggles to promote nationalism and a better life for all of us. To paraphrase the words of the late Bob Marley, we must emancipate ourselves from this modern day slavery, but none but ourselves can free ourselves. We take this opportunity once again to wish Trinidad and Tobago a happy Emancipation Day on behalf of the Leader of the Opposition, the Honorable Kamla Prasad Bisesa, and the United National Congress in furtherance of a better Trinidad and Tobago. I thank you here this morning, and on behalf of myself and Mr. Tahaka Obika, we will now avail ourselves to questions from members of the media.
We have a couple of questions that were sent in to Mr. Obika. What accountability and transparency has there been for the extra $1 billion per month that this country has been receiving due to high oil prices?
Well, we've had to wait at the lips of the Minister of Finance. And of course, we in the opposition have always found it difficult to get clear answers from a Minister of Finance who seems to be the de facto Prime Minister. We know that Keith Rowley is the de jure Prime Minister. He holds the office and the title, but it appears that the Minister of Finance wields the axe, because when we ask for details of expenditure on specific matters, he always gives tongue-in-cheek responses, and we are forced to wait, like everyone else, for official reports of either the Ministry of Finance before the budget or the Auditor General as well. The other fear then of an early budget is what will happen with the transparency and accountability that happens, where the Ministry of Finance usually presents annual estimates of expenditure and revenue, where you can compare apples with apples, or starch mango with starch mango, because we have a year end that is September 30th. And if you change that and you have a budget that is early, of course, maybe they will give us an estimate towards the year end, or they may decide not to. We don't know. So the issue with respect to transparency, it's an ongoing issue, but going forward, we are worried as to what will be the transparency in this year's budget.
To Mr. Darsing, what kind of impact do you expect the WASA restructuring exercise will have on consumers?
Well, again, we have posed that question in terms of whether it will benefit in terms of their bills and whether it will bring about an efficiency in terms of a better service for the customers of WASA. At the end of the day, we have not been told of any clear-cut plan, because as I said, from day one, we heard earlier on this week 213 workers. Today we are hearing 426 workers from a supervisory point of view. So if you look up all the managers who will supervise the workforce that is left within WASA, so it is boggling in terms of this transformation plan that they are speaking about. It has nothing to do with transformation. There seems to be one of privatization, and privatization could only mean higher bills for the ordinary customers of the Water and Sewerage Authority in terms of what new entities to come.
Okay. To Mr. Baker, why haven't the globally high oil prices resulted in a massive oil boom in Trinidad and Tobago like the 1970s or the 2000s?
Well, that again goes back to the question that was asked about transparency. We have to remember that we have always historically had a refinery, and the maths would have been simpler in terms of the benefits of the refinery to cheaper fuel locally. What we don't have is a proper picture as to what is the net effect of importing refined fuels and so on. So we don't have that clear. But what is also the issue is the government's approach to spending doesn't favor the majority. You have a lot of companies that find it difficult to get their payments on time, and if that happens, that has a trickle-down effect to the subcontractors, the communities that they live in, and so on. So there is whilst there is a sharing of the burden by the masses, there is no benefiting equally. So there is no equal benefit. So the government's approach, as you say, really, whilst it may sound to some as a tongue-in-cheek approach to the government's policy, Raulinomics really and truly could be the reason why we're not seeing this wealth trickling down to the population. Of course, the Prime Minister is a believer that the rich should get richer. He's not too clear on persons pulling themselves out of poverty with assistance from the government. In fact, he's very clear that they should wean themselves off the government. And he has successfully done so in the past 7 years to the detriment of the households, as evidenced by the financial literacy report this month by the central bank. The households are struggling to make it to the month.
Final question, this could be to either panelist. The Prime Minister, when he spoke about this windfall, he was very careful in terms of not really going into details as far as what it would be used for. With the early budget, do you expect that there will be additional cuts? Because he has also talked about, the need for tightening up belts, etc.
Well, it'll be very difficult to justify cuts when you already made it billion up to now, up to the announcement, and potentially, we see the crisis in Russia is ratcheting up. The Ukrainian president just ordered exodus from Donetsk, so one of the eastern regions in Ukraine. So the crisis is ratcheting up. It's getting more intense, and therefore, as we approach winter, we don't expect to see any decline in our fortunes in terms of oil and gas and petrochemicals. So it will be difficult to justify cuts in expenditure. What this population should expect really should be some level of reprieve in terms of gate funding and access to education, a school book program, laptops, tablets for children, and so on. We should get these basic things. What you're actually finding is, however, big business getting blighs, you understand? Getting access to feeding at the trough. And so they're cutting, but they're cutting where it affects the average citizen, as opposed to where it affects their friends who are in business.
Well, the Raulinomics of this government really is not in the interest of the poor, the vulnerable, and the impoverished. And his lack of leadership in terms of the middle class and the working class will tell me that over the last 7 years it has been a sustained attack on the poor and the ordinary citizens of the country. His style of governing Trinidad and Tobago really lacks a sense of vision, a sense of creativity and innovativeness as it relates to growth and development. So I really, whilst I would want to agree with Tahaka as it relates to the areas that we should see money is being channeled into, from where I sit, I will see no growth in education, health, in terms of development of our infrastructure from a road network, bridges point of view, and so on. And all I can see is further crises emerging in our country. Well, if there are no further questions, we want to take the opportunity on behalf of, as I said, myself here and our colleagues in the United National Congress to wish everyone a very safe Emancipation Day and enjoy the festivities. Tahaka has extended an invitation to join him and others at the Marabella, the
Southern Marines Band Theatre.
Southern Marines Band Theatre in Marabella, 3:30 p.m. in observance of Emancipation Day. Slavery must be no more on all fronts, in Trinidad and Tobago and from a global point of view. We thank you. Have a safe day.